to be loved.
Bob Marley and the Wailers at 19 minutes to 11 on BBC Radio Sheffield. My next guest is someone who's inspired to be a teacher after a trip to Botswana, Africa, where she spent 2 terms helping in school. She got back to England, did a PGCE in primary education, spent 15 years doing that, and she's not doing it anymore. She's working in fast food now, and that's not the whole story. She's Abby Golland, and she's joined me to talk about her life and times, and we're going to pick up the story of her life when she moved to Sheffield in 2005. Why?
Morning, Roni. My husband and I wanted a change for our family. We'd been living in Oxford and bringing up our 3 kids, and we're getting to a point where we wanted something for ourselves, and on a very practical level we needed a bigger space to live in. There were 5 of us, so we're not afraid to try something different. So we toyed quite seriously with living on a houseboat and looked at lots of different houseboats all around the country. I also was interviewed for a job in the Shetlands, in an island called Fula, which is one of the most remote islands in the country, where the population was 30 and there were 2 children in the school.
Did you get the job?
I didn't get the job. There were 2 applicants.
Couldn't you control them?
I actually, when I got there, I thought this would be all right for me and Richard, but to bring our 3 children to such a remote place, if they weren't happy, it would be a pretty big thing. And Sheffield had been on our minds for about 5 years. We come up to see Richard's family, and finally I was coming up here for work, and I remember driving into Sheffield and looking over the view and just ringing Richard and saying, this is it, this is where I've always wanted to be, come on, let's move back. And so we had sort of 6 months looking around for houses, and in fact found somewhere to live before either of us had jobs. And then I remember driving south going, oh my God. But the move, once we decided and once we got here, it was just, it has always felt right. We settled very quickly. People come to visit us and say, it looks like you've been here forever, and the children, it's like they've always lived here.
And it's the best radio station in the country, so you've got that as well. Did the kids not kick off a bit?
Our daughter Billy, who's now 15, she was 10, and so she was moving just before year 6, and she was the one who was more resistant. She already had friends, but actually we did a bit of reverse psychology, because she didn't want to live on Fula and she didn't really want to live on a houseboat. So I think
Meadowhead was a better there.
Meadowhead was the best one. The other 2, Alfie and Phoebe, really it was sort of like their destiny. They sort of, they've just sort of fitted straight in. And as I was saying, they talk like little Yorkshire children. Phoebe sounds like a proper Yorkshire girl, Billy sounds like me, and Alfie's bilingual.
That he speaks posh at home and Sheffield
at school. Yeah.
Right. So you made the choice and you've come to Sheffield. And did you at that time assume you were going to be teaching and things like that?
Yes, that's exactly. I mean, teaching is a great profession because you can slot in and out. I'd done a return to teaching course because actually I'd worked in nursery for many years. And I came up and worked as a supply teacher, and I actually went around to several schools and then settled in a school in Chesterfield, the Spire School, and did a term there. And then actually the nursery chain that I used to work for rang me and asked me to go back. So I had 2 years away from nursery, but I went back to them because they had nurseries in Sheffield as well as all around the country. So I spent 3 years working at a sort of senior management level for that company, which was great in lots of ways. It was very exciting. I learnt lots of sort of things about running business and that sort of thing, but it started to take me more and more away from
your own children.
Yeah, exactly. And the reason we'd made the move was very much as a family, and suddenly my life was sort of pulling me away, or this job was, which was why we came to the decision 18 months ago to try something different. We always have. At that period Richard was looking after the children. At other periods I've been the one looking after the children, and it was Richard that sort of said, come on, let's do something together. There's
something different you did. Well, before I ask you to tell us what that is, have you ever been to Mexico?
No, I haven't.
What did you decide to do?
We decided to sell Mexican food.
Part 2 after this. Jackson 5 on BBC Radio Sheffield. It's 11 minutes to 11. Abby Golland is my guest of the day. Abby was just telling us the little she knows about Mexico and why it's quite important that she doesn't. But before that, we spoke once before on the radio because you rang us. Will you tell us the story of the call that you made to talk about your railway journey?
You were doing a piece a couple of weeks ago about great train journeys that people had made, and I remembered immediately a train journey I made from Gaborone, which is the capital city of Botswana, up to Bulawayo and down to Victoria Falls in Zimbabwe in I think 1990, and I was sitting at home trying to work, and I was just compelled to ring and tell you, and I hadn't really thought about the train journey for quite a long time. I couldn't do anything else, so I thought, well, I better just ring and tell you, and it was an amazing train journey because it really... Well, first of all, it was the day before Christmas Eve, and I got on the train at Gaborone, and all the Zimbabweans had come down to Johannesburg, because the train had come from there, to do their Christmas shopping, because Zimbabwe even then was very difficult to buy things. So the train was full. I was the only white person, and I think there must have been maybe 1,000 people, and the riots had just happened in Oxford and in Newcastle, in a very hot summer back in England, and that had been very racially driven, and so it really, really made me think about how it would feel to be a black person in a very white environment. And then obviously I made the journey, and the funny things happened, like we stopped at the crossing where the customs and excise people came on to check 1,000 people's Christmas shopping, so we were there for 7 hours, and everyone ran off to get a drink, and I just thought, well, I'll sit and wait here till the queues have gone, and of course what happened was the bottle store emptied because things ran out. I wasn't expecting that, so I sat there for 7 hours rather thirsty. And then I changed trains in Bulawayo and got on what was still called the Rhodesian Railway. I mean, it still had the R&R on it.
And it went very posh suddenly.
Very posh, yeah. with a man with gloves who brought me cups of tea and white linen, which was also an uncomfortable thing, having just had this experience of being the only white person. And then arriving in Victoria Falls. It was a 24-hour journey altogether, and arriving in Victoria Falls on Christmas Eve to spend Christmas by myself. I mean, I had heard that that's where I'd gone there because that's where apparently people go if they're travelling, and had the most amazing Christmas, met other travellers. We went to the Vic Falls Hotel and I ate crocodile and impala. Had to borrow someone's posh shoes to do that. And my travels began.
It's brilliant. Yeah. It's brilliant. I'm ever so glad you rang up. It was wonderful. Now then, tell us the story about Mexican food and how you ended up in that world.
Well, as I said, Richard and I were looking for something to do together. Richard has a background in catering, and he owned and ran a restaurant in Oxford where he did have a Mexican night, and that was always the most popular. But something that we have a shared passion about is good, healthy food, nutritious food, and obviously having 3 children, that was, I used to be very passionate about that when I worked in nursery, and we always cooked good food for the kids and believed that actually if you put good food in front of people, they will eat it, But we didn't want a restaurant hanging around our neck. We didn't want to be working evenings and that sort of thing. So street food immediately came to mind. And we love the fact that it's honest. We love the idea of cooking in front of people, the sort of theatre of it. And it was Richard's dad, actually, who lives in Toronto, who was bombarding us with pictures of taco trucks and burrito bars and this sort of Mexican street food in Toronto. So we sort of thought, well, we'll look into it. And of course, once we tried a burrito, which I must send you one.
You must tell me what they are, really.
A burrito is a tortilla, usually 12-inch, and in it you put, whatever you like, but traditionally it's got beans, refried black beans or pinto beans, some meat, if you're wealthy enough to have the meat, salsa, which can be as spicy or as mild as you like, salad, sour cream, and then you can add things like jalapenos, coriander, cheese, guacamole, and rice. Now that actually it's more of the Americans that have added rice, because the burrito is very, very popular in America. It's almost sort of like a burger, and so we also put rice in ours, and then it gets rolled up in foil, and off you go. So it's almost like, how the pasties, the pastry is holds all the meat. It's the same idea, really, that it's a meal in a wrap, and we cook it all in front of you, so everything is cooked there, freshly prepared, nothing is bought in. And like I said, once we'd eaten our first burrito, we were smitten. And you can start playing around with the different salsas and the different meats. So last year we bought a trailer, and we went on the road. And we travelled, the continental market that comes to Sheffield. Yeah. We were lucky enough to get in with them, and it's actually a very good, well-run market. We went around the country with them. So we went to Glasgow and Ilkley and Cardiff and Barnsley and Leicester and you name it. We also did all the local events, so Peace in the Park, Sheffield Pride, Cliffhanger, the Food Festival, and learnt our trade really, and did the trailer up, bright colours. It's all sort of about being sort of fresh and bright and recognisable, but also about being clean and professional, you know, so you'd want to come and eat from our kitchen. And then the story of the actual burrito bar on Pinston Street is that we went to the council and said, hello, we'd like a pitch for our trailer, and they said, no, we don't want you to do that, but how about this row of empty shops, this area that's up for redevelopment, you know, you could have a short-term lease there, which was perfect because it was low risk for us. It was solving a problem for the council, it was bringing a bit of life back into a sort of a dying part of the city. And so there we are. That's where we opened on February the 16th. So we're still doing the events, but the shop is a base, which is great.
Are you surprised by how your life's turned out, Abby?
Yes, probably the events of the last 18 months are not probably what I foresaw.
You've become a school dinner lady, right? Being a teacher.
Yes, exactly. But I always knew I wanted to have children, and a family was very important. So the decision to sort of stop a job that took me away from that was obvious, really, I suppose. The thing that is big for change for me is running my own business, but Richard's always done that, and that's probably been the hardest transition, actually, is going from being an employee to being...
Where did you meet him?
In Oxford. He lived on a boat, a little houseboat, in East Oxford, and he was friends with some people that I'd been to college in Newcastle with, funnily enough, and I came back down and there was this lovely man living in a boat,
on a boat,
sculpting gargoyles, and we became fast friends.
Thank you ever so much, Abby Golland, the story of her life and times and her burritos.